Hi there, everyone. Welcome to Carl Hour Photography. I'm Carl. We're talking Strobing basketball. Let's roll the intro and get right into it. Okay, strobing basketball. First of all, what is strobing? You know that if you have any knowledge of photography, strobes are something that you see in a studio, something that studio photographers use to light their subjects. Um, but in reality, if you've got more of an advanced knowledge of strobes, you'll realize that flashes on camera and off camera are considered strobes. Now, when you're strobing something, it means that you're using one or more strobes to light that subject. And it doesn't have to be in a controlled studio environment. It can be outdoors. It can be indoors in a small gymnasium or an office or a multi-purpose room, all the way up to collegiate professional stadiums. The only thing that you wouldn't be strobing would be in major field sport stadiums like soccer, football, or baseball. Now, on the high school level, you can use a flash or a strobe on your monopod to light the field. Um, and we'll talk about that in another video. That's something that is very rarely done. In fact, the only people that typically will use a flash to light football are Max Preps photographers. But anyway, strobing. Um, Basically, I mean, we're going to be talking about strobing basketball here, and I may talk about other sports too, but for the most part, it's going to be just uh, basketball. I'm going to talk about strobing half court, full court using 3 strobes, and an entire gymnasium using 4 strobes. Now, first of all, the question is, why should you worry about strobing? If you've tried shooting in a gym before, most high school and middle school gyms are very dark. Typically, you're looking at anywhere from ISO 3200 to ISO 10,000 or higher to get a decent exposure to freeze action. And this is fine for most uses, for a newspaper or small images on a website. That's fine. Uh, but when you get into printing 8 by 10, 16 by 20s, or having to crop in more, you're going to find that the images that you have at higher ISOs are not as high quality as they could be. So by adding light through external strobes, off-camera flashes, off-camera strobes, you can lower your ISO. Lowering your ISO increases the quality of your photos. Now, before we even get into setting up strobes or where to place strobes or even going out and buying the strobes you may need, there's one very important thing you need to do yourself as a photographer, and that's get insurance. Go into your insurance agent, whether it be automotive or home or renter's agent, and talk to them about a photo business. Tell them that you want to have your gear insured. It's always a smart idea to have your gear insured. There are some insurance policies out there that will cost you up to $500 a year, typically less, and it will cover all your gear. In fact, like if you have a 1D Mark IV and it gets destroyed while you're out shooting, like let's say you put it down and pick up another camera, and an athlete runs off the field or the court and steps on your camera and it shatters, or you mount it on a tripod or something and the tripod falls over during the shoot and it breaks. There are some insurance policies that you pay the deductible and they will buy you the newest version of that camera. So if you have the 1D Mark IV, you're going to get a 1DX Mark II paid for. That's a pretty cool insurance policy. So that's good to have because that will keep you up to date on your gear if anything breaks on them. And the other part of the insurance that you want to be sure you get is liability. Now, there's some liability they'll cover. Actually, it's great for wedding photographers or event photographers where you take photos that can only be taken once in a lifetime. If something happens from the compact flash card going corrupt or your hard drive going corrupt or getting stolen, you can get reimbursed for that. Like that way, if a wedding party comes after you and says, hey, you ruined our wedding because your photos didn't turn out, or you lost them, or they were stolen, or they were just crap, you're covered for that. And but then there's also the liability insurance for if something happens with your photo equipment that falls on a fan or an athlete or damages some property, you're covered. And typically these range in $500,000 increments. You can get $500,000, million and a half. And if you're going to be hanging strobes anywhere, you need to have this insurance. The last time I checked, and it may have increased, it may have decreased, but the last time I checked, it was a minimum $1 million liability to hang strobes at an NCAA event. I personally carry $2 million in liability. That way, if by chance I can strobe a pro event, college, or high school, I'm covered on every level. And this is very important because if your strobe happens to come loose and break safety cables and fall to the ground, if it's in an NBA arena or a college arena or even a high school arena, it could fall on the court, it could damage the court, it could hit a player and hurt them, it could hit a fan, it could kill someone falling from a great distance. So having the liability insurance is very important. In fact, most NCAA arenas will not allow you to up in the catwalks until you show them that you have liability. So, that being said, once you have your liability insurance, and if you're only going to be doing middle school and high school, and you don't want to spend a lot on insurance, you could likely get away with $500,000 in liability. I would prefer seeing everybody out there have a minimum of $1 million, because that seems to be when people sue, they usually go for $1 million. They don't go for $500,000. They go for $1 million. So having that liability is very important. Now, the tools you're going to need range from arena to arena, gym to gym, room to room, and honestly, gear to gear. If you're a studio photographer or you do portraits and stuff on the side, and you already have some studio strobes, you may be able to use those to strobe your high school basketball. When I was using full studio strobes, I was using Alien B ABE 800 strobes. I had 4 of them with sports reflectors. If you have Alien Bs, Einsteins, White Lightnings, Inochromes, Pro Photos, there are so many different strobes out there. If you already have those in your arsenal, you're ready to strobe, or at least you've got the strobe part. You're going to probably need some mounting stuff that, as a studio photographer, you may not have. But you don't need those big strobes. You don't need to go out and spend $1,000 on strobes to strobe basketball at the high school level. In fact, you can even strobe at the college level for a little less. And I'm going to talk to you how to do that. Now, first of all, what I'm going to be telling you here is from my experience. I've shot in dozens of gyms, and I can tell you this. there are no two gyms that are the same. I've been in gyms that have been designed identical and the lighting is different in them. And that comes from things on the wall, the color of the paint for the school, the design of the ceiling, if there are banners hanging, all sorts of different things. It also comes into effect when you're mounting your strobes. Sometimes there's an upper track or a balcony or maybe really high bleachers. Other times there's nothing. I've been able to mount strobes to railings, to pipes, exposed pipes on the wall, to volleyball stanyards that have been pushed off to behind the bleachers, to light stands, to an exit sign. Just using what I can to mount my strobes. Now, when you're mounting strobes, if you're going to need some way of mounting them. What I'm using right now are, let me pull my mount out here. I am using super clamps. And with a super clamp, I can mount this to a railing or to the side of a bleacher or to the end of a bleacher. I can mount this to a volleyball stanyard. I can mount this to just about anything. And then I've got this little metal stud that I can either screw directly into my strobe or I can mount another articulating arm to it to position my strobe just perfect. This will work with everything from camera mounted flashes to full-size studio strobes. This is a Manfrotto, and it says the maximum load is 15 kilograms. So that's pretty beefy. After a few years, you'll likely want to replace these because the springs and stuff will get worn in them after a while, and you'll want to have clamps that you know are going to stay clamped. Now, on top of that, besides your strobes, and we'll talk about what type of strobes in a minute. Okay, on top of the super clamp, I can mount like this umbrella stand mount, and this allows me to be able to position my strobe in many different ways. Now, besides the super clamp, if you don't want to use a super clamp, maybe you want to use light stands. Maybe your gym doesn't have a place for you to mount super clamps. You can use light stands. I've used everything from standard 5-foot light stands to 13-foot light stands. When I use a standard size light stand, I'm either up on a balcony and no one else is allowed up there, and I'll set the light stands up and point my strobes, and I don't have to worry about anybody tripping over them or anything. But I've taken the light stands up on bleachers and used bungee cords to tie them to the side of the bleacher up really high, and then getting my strobe even higher with the neck of the light stand, to using a 13-foot light stand on the floor. When I do a 13-foot light stand on the floor, you need to sandbag it. Not only will I sandbag it to keep it bottom heavy so it won't topple over if somebody bumps into it, I will use gaffer's tape and tape the feet down, plus the cable, the power cord for studio strobe. I will run that along the floor, and I will gaffer tape that down so people aren't tripping over it. Now, besides the light stand, besides light stands or super clamps, you need something to trigger the strobe from your camera. Now, on a professional level and college level, you wouldn't be using light stands at all basically you'd go up into the catwalks of your NBA arena or your college arena prior to the game, prior to anyone being on the court, and you would hang your strobes. And now there's security here, and this is something that you should think about on the high school level too. With your strobe, you've got your strobe, and typically there's a flash tube and a modeling lamp. Take that modeling lamp out if possible. There's no need to have that extra thing in there, and it can over time loosen and fall. And the last thing you need is a light bulb dropping out of your strobe and hitting somebody on the head. So take the modeling light out. Just have the flash tube and the strobe, and then you've got your reflector. Now, on your reflector, using a metal hole punch or tin snips, you want to cut 4 holes on the rim of that reflector and go into Home Depot, Lowe's, someplace that you can get Lexan, just a small sheet of Lexan that you can trace the diameter of your reflector and cut a circle and pop a couple holes in that, and then zip tie that very tight to the opening of your reflector. That way, if your flash tube explodes while you're strobing an event, shards of glass will not fall on the court, on players, on fans, on anybody. That's a safety feature. Also, get safety cables. If you go to B&H Photo and type in safety cables, a whole bunch of different types of safety cables will come up. I like the ones that are about 3 feet long. They've got a loop on one end and a carabiner on the other end. That way you can wrap it around and loop it through and do all sorts of different things and then lock it together. You want to be able to put a safety cable on the reflector, so you'll want to tin snip another hole that you can run the cable through it, and you want to somehow get that safety cable in your strobe, on your strobe somehow. Now, sometimes going through the neck or through a built-in umbrella reflector holder, the pole holder, some way, somehow get a cord through that. That way, if your super clamp fails and your strobe starts to fall, you can have it anchored down, and that way it won't fall on top of someone. Now, that's the safety side of it. Now, besides having safety stuff and mounts and everything, you need something to trigger your strobes with. Now, the industry standard is Pocket Wizards. This is a +2. You've got 3 versions out now. There's the Pocket Wizard Plus X, which is the bare bones basic. I think it's 10 channels. Might be 16, but I think it's 10 channels. There is the Pocket Wizard Plus 3, which is a very good trigger. And then there's the Pocket Wizard Multimax 2. Probably top of the line. You can get custom codes or custom channels for it. So in a situation where you may not be the only one strobing, if you have a custom channel set up on your Pocket Wizards, you don't risk anybody else triggering them. And no one else is going to be stealing your strobes then, and you won't be triggering someone else's strobes. So Pocket Wizards are the industry standard. There are other type of triggers out there. You can get by really cheap. When I started, I used some Chinese, what I called Chinese Pocket Wizards. They were Chinese wireless triggers. Basically came with a little adapter that went on top of your camera, a little transmitter, which I had to drill a hole into and add an antenna that I found the details online. Probably 10 years ago. Probably even more than that. Let's see, 5, 10, probably 12 years ago. And then you also get a little receiver that plugs into your flash or your camera, because you can use it to trigger another camera. But you plug it into your flash, you plug it into your camera, and the range is not that great. But to get started, It's not a bad option. I think I got mine on eBay for like $30. Uh, then there are also some manufacturers exclusive triggers. I have a flash from Autorama, and it's called a Flashpoint Streak Light AB 360. It's a bare bulb flash, very similar to a quantum flash. And I also got a wireless trigger with it. Now, what's nice about this wireless trigger is I can adjust the power of the strobe from my camera. So if I say, okay, I'm going to shoot at 1/2 power on this strobe, and I get down on the floor and I'm looking at it, going, boy, this is way too hot. I can power down or power up the strobe from my camera without having to go all the way back up and changing the mode of the flash. So that's one nice thing about these. Paul Buff makes the same thing. He has a little wireless transmitter thing, and it's really nice. So anyway, you've got triggers, you've got your mounts, but now what kind of strobes? Like I said, if you have studio strobes, you may be able to use those. And I say may because you want to check the paperwork that came with them or the website. Check with the manufacturer. You need something that has at least a 1/1000th of a second flash duration. If you look online and you look at different flashes, you'll see they say, oh, 1/10,000th of a second, 1/6400th of a second, 1/1000th of a second, 1/500th of a second, 1/250th of a second. Well, 1/500th and 1/250th is not going to work. You're going to be shooting at your camera's flash sync, which is typically 1/250th of a second. There are some cameras that are 1/200th or less. I think Sony might be less for a flash sync. And there are a few cameras like the Canon 1D Mark IV has a 1/320th of a second flash sync. The 1D, the original classic 1D, had a 1/500th flash sync. Awesome. I still have a 1D camera that I haven't used it in a few years, but I still have the original 1D because that 1/500th of a second flash sync is just awesome. But typically you're going to be at 1/250th of a second. Shooting action photos, 1/250th of a second is not fast enough to freeze action. That's where the strobe comes in. When you're shooting with strobes, you want the light from your strobes to be about 2 stops above what the ambient light is. So let's say a good example is if you're in a gym that, let's say, to get a good ambient exposure, not of action, but just a good ambient exposure, you're at ISO 6400, 1/250th of a second at ISO or at aperture of f4, and you're getting a decent exposure with that. You put your strobes on, you turn your strobes on, and you're shooting at ISO 400 with the same shutter speed and the same aperture, and everything exposed great, you're golden. Because if you turn your strobe off and leave it at ISO 400 and take a picture, you're basically going to have a dark frame. Well, what's lighting your subject, what's freezing your subject, is your flash duration. That flash duration becomes your shutter speed. So while you're shooting physically with a 1/250th of a second, you're capturing stuff at 1/1000th, 1/10,000th, depending on what your flashes or your strobe's flash duration is. Now, there are some flashes out there, specifically third-party Chinese made, that'll say 1/1000th of a second flash duration. And it is true, kind of. It'll actually, in reality, be closer to a 1/500th or 1/400th or 1/300th, and you'll get some ghosting. Now, So I mean, you want to, if you stick with a well-known brand, and it says 1/1000th or 1/10,000th, you can be pretty secure in the thought that yeah, that's going to be what they say it is. Now, also, typically flash durations increase. You get, or not increase, the duration decreases the less power behind it. So if you've got a flash that is 1/1000th at full power, it could be 1/10,000th at quarter power. Or if you have a flash that is not fast enough, like 1/320th at full power, it could be at 1/1000th at half power. And right now, let me tell you, using Alien B AB800s as a kind of a generic all around flash strobe at half power, I want to say they were about 1/1250th of a second. And using 4 of those in a giant arena at half power, I was getting ISO 200 where I would normally shoot at ISO 3200. So this was in a college arena. Typically, when I was strobing with the AB800s, I was at quarter power for half court. If I had the full court strobed, either all on the same channel or half at time, quarter power, all the way around. And I was getting about ISO 400 in a gymnasium. Now, there's other options for your strobing, for your power and everything. And we'll get into that in a minute. But besides studio strobes, you can use other types of strobes or flash guns. When I started strobing, I used Vivitar 285 flashes. These were, the ones I had were from the 80s. I would trigger them with the Chinese pocket wizards, and they cost me, I think one cost me $25 on eBay and one cost me $35-40 on Craigslist. And my mounts were, I made my own mounts with clamps from Home Depot that cost me about $8, and I had some photo studs laying around, and one side, the big thick side, screwed right into a hole in the handle of the Home Depot clamps, and the other one fit right into the bottom of my strobe or my flash. It worked out perfect. I was basically strobing with my wireless Chinese transmitters, the Vivitar flashes, and the Home Depot clamps. I was strobing middle school and high school basketball for just over $100 to start with. Now, it wasn't great. I ended up spending more money getting battery packs for the Vivitars, and I kept building onto it till the point that I outgrew it and went on to the studio strobes. Now, besides regular flashes from Vivitar, third-party flashes, you can use Canon or Nikon speedlights. I use a 580 EX2 as one of my strobes. My other strobe is, I use a bare bulb, the Autorama streak light, which is very similar to a quantum flash. Now, a quantum Q flash with a battery pack can run you $1,000. The streak light, if you watch for them on sale at Autorama, you can get the strobe and a battery pack, a manual setup, for $350. Pointing your strobes. You want to point your strobes. You want to have them at least 13 feet high, 12 to 13 feet high. Higher the better. The higher you have, the less harsh the shadows are, and you avoid shadows from like the backboard, things that are just out of your control. But at least 13 feet, 12, 13 feet high, and you want it at the corners and back some. I like about between 13 and 15 feet high and about 5 to 10 feet back from the baseline. And then on the corners, basically even with the sideline. And then I point my strobes at mid-court, and the middle of that strobe should be right about at head height of the player, so about 6 feet high. That gives me the best coverage from baseline to about half court. Now, if you want to shoot from that one end all the way down and get like rebounds or blocks or whatever, you can add a third strobe halfway down the court in the stands, all the way up at the top, pointed down at the other basket. Some people like this, other people don't. I personally don't. I don't like having a strobe in with the fans. It worries me that somebody will stand up and knock it over, or their head will block the flash, or whatever. There's just a number of things I don't like about having it down there. I would rather have 2 more strobes up high pointed down on the court down there. But anyway, that's me personally. Now, another option is, and this is only if somebody says, hey, well, no, it's not only. If you don't like the look of the direct flash, if you think the shadows are too harsh, or maybe it's too hot, try bouncing. Point your strobes up at the middle of the key, the ceiling, directly above the key. Point your strobes directly up there and let them hit the ceiling and bounce down. This will work in some gyms, it won't work in others. Gyms that have nothing hanging from the ceiling or everything's painted white works great. But if they've got a lot of banners hanging up or dark HVAC equipment or whatever, it can tend to not work as well. But by bouncing it, it turns it into kind of like a giant softbox and giving you nice even shadows. I personally like the bounce look better than the direct look in high school, but I like the direct look better in a stadium in college and professional. Now, that being said, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pros, much lower ISO when you're shooting with strobes. Much lower. Just a beautiful look. The quality of the image is great. If you need to crop in some, you're not going to lose quality. Colors. The colors of the uniforms, the ball, skin tones, everything just pops. And those are really the main two positives. The negatives are, and this is the biggest negative, the negatives are you lose your frames per second. If you've got a camera that does 10, 12, 14 frames per second, you no longer have that. You've got one shot per recycle of your strobes. So you need to anticipate the action. Instead of shooting off a burst of a layup or a dunk, from running down the court to taking off to cocking the ball back to throwing it through the hoop, you've got to anticipate where is the best looking shot going to be. And you're going to miss it. Plenty of times you're going to miss it. Keep practicing. Eventually you'll nail it. And it'll get easier as you strobe more. Your first time out strobing, you might come back with 100, 150 images and only 10 or 15 of them you're happy with. Second time, you'll probably double that. Third, fourth, fifth time, it'll just continue to get better and better and better. There are days I go out and strobe and I just have a horrible day. And it's not because I'm not anticipating the action. I'm anticipating the action. The action's just not there. It's the players can have a bad day and they just look horrible, or they've got these weird looks on their faces or whatever. It's a combination of things, but it'll come to you. And that's really the biggest drawback. The other drawback is when you're using camera flashes, you're looking at batteries. Now, using an external battery pack with rechargeable batteries for like a Canon or a Nikon flash or the Vivitars, that's great. Your recycle times will be quicker than just having four AA batteries in the flash, and they'll last longer, so you can shoot more than just like one game. But you're still using batteries, and you got to keep them charged and be ready to go. The advantage with studio strobes is you can plug them in. Drawback with that is there are some gyms you can't plug into. There won't be a plug nearby. In one gym I shot, on one side, mounted the strobe, had to use a pipe on the wall to mount it, but there was a power outlet right there. Didn't have to use an extension cord at all. On the other side of the gym, there were no outlets. Thankfully, I had a battery pack for that strobe for my Alien Bees. I had a Vagabond Mini. So I was able to use the battery pack on one side and a power outlet on the other side. But it was a pain in the butt. And when you do use a power cable or light stands or whatever, drawback is you do have to tape those down, make sure that they're not going to fall, make sure they're secure, so if somebody runs into them or they don't trip over a cable or knock them over. When you're first starting out, this will be a drawback, the setup. You'll set them up, you'll point them, you'll power them on, you'll turn everything on, you'll go down, you'll take some test shots and go, ooh, that doesn't look good. And you'll go back up and you'll repoint them or change the power or this or that. And you'll find yourself going back and forth 4 or 5 times the first few times you're setting them up. Then after a while, you'll get into like one gym that you shoot all the time and you'll just know, oh, I need this power pointed right here on this, at this height, and I'm good to go. And you are. And then you'll walk into other gyms and you'll look around and you'll start seeing places where you could mount, and you'll know how your strobes act. You go, oh yeah, I want to mount here, and then maybe I'll try pointing over here. And as you do it more, you'll become more of a pro with it, and learn more of what your strobes can and can't do. For me, using the Autorama Streak Light and the 580EX, I carry them in a backpack with all the mounts and everything, separate from my camera, and it takes me all of 5 minutes to set them up. 5 minutes to tear them down, I'm good to go. With studio strobes, I had a big case and unraveling the power cords and extension cords and plugging them in and getting them out and security cables and all this stuff, blah blah blah. At least a half an hour to set them up, 15-20 minutes to tear them down. So there are advantages and disadvantages to strobes and flashes and all sorts of things. But anyway, we're going to end this part of the video here. And when we pick back up, which will be a little while for me, but only seconds for you, I'll be showing you my setup at a gymnasium on a banister, how I point them, and then I'll show you some sample images from the game. Okay, so we're at Ralston Valley High School in Arvada, Colorado, and as you can see behind me there are bleachers that are set up for the band tonight. Normally this room is empty except for the cheerleaders. This is the cheerleaders' space. So they'll warm up, they'll get dressed, they'll do whatever up here. But on this side, behind this blue curtain, which will be going up very soon, is a railing looking down on the court, and that's where I have my strobes placed. I've got one up right now, and I'm going to show you it and how I've pointed it, and then I'll set the other one up. So as you can see, there's my strobe. I've got it at 8th power. Battery pack's hanging down there, and a pocket wizard hanging out there. And I have it pointed, just about mid-court. And my other light, which will be down there, I will cross with it. So this is my setup, and if you look, I'm right basically setting up on the sideline. So that's what I did for that one. Let me throw my other one together and I'll take it down to the other end, set it up, and we'll take a look at that. Okay, so here we are at the other side of the court, the other side of the baseline, and I've got my 580EX. This is a, I don't know if you can see it, but it's at a quarter power. And then I've got an umbrella stand, and the super clamp, and a pocket wizard. And this pocket wizard I'm going to pop over here, because I'll be shooting on that side. So that's my setup. Now again, while these are not studio strobes, these are strobes that are going to be powerful enough to take me from ISO 6400, 10,000 to ISO 1600. And with the 7D Mark II and the 1D Mark IV, 1600 is a phenomenal ISO to shoot at. So it's still going to look really clean and nice, and we'll see some sample images now. Okay, so in this first shot, of course, you're saying, boy, that's dark. Strobing sucks. This shot is my settings for strobes on my camera, 1/250th of a second, f4.5 at an ISO of 1250. I'll shoot between 1250 and 1600 in this setting. But this is without my strobes firing, because I wanted to show you how dark my actual exposure is minus the strobes. When I fire the strobes off, they are lighting everything. So I have shot in situations where this would be a completely black frame. I would not go much lighter than this when you're strobing, because you're going to start introducing ghosting, or the actual ambient light is going to affect your images, causing blurs or, like I said, ghosting. Okay, this obviously has my strobes turned on. Now, this shot is well exposed, but you can see one of the drawbacks with direct strobing. You can see the shadow on his jersey from his hand. But I do like this shot. It was with a 70-200 2.8 lens, shot at ISO 1250 with a shutter speed of 1/250th of a second and an aperture of f4.5. I zoomed in pretty tight on him. Yeah, I'm cutting off his legs, but I wanted to really focus in on him and the ball. So this is a good example of a direct strobe shot. Now this shot here, I love. This was a snapshot. Number 45 is going up for a dunk. He had a steal and was wide open, and I was able to... I just put the camera down because they were going to the other side of the court, and he stole the ball, and I yanked the camera up and was able to focus and get this one shot. Now, shooting with the strobe, I was limited to that one shot. I couldn't rattle off 4 or 5 shots on the dunk attempt. But because he was unobstructed and I was already kind of focused in his zone, the camera locked onto focus. I anticipated what he was going to do, and I got him just right at the peak moment, right before he puts the ball over the rim into the net. Again, this does show a drawback with the direct strobes with the shadow on the ball, but overall, the image is just a phenomenal exposed image. Something else that this image shows is where my light is actually falling. While the very first image I showed you was very dark, the walls of this gymnasium are picking up some of the reflective light from my strobes, but you can see the ambient light is leaking in on the walls, because those walls are pure white. But in this image, they show yellow. That's because there's a mix of the ambient light and my strobe going in there. But that's, again, another drawback. In this final shot, this is really the best of the 4 images. While the dunk was great and the close-up of the player dribbling was great, this really shows a good showing of the background, where the fans are not really out of the ambient light look. but they're being lit some with the strobe. They're a little darker than the subject, so it allows the subject, the player, to just jump out of the image for you. And this is the benefit of strobing right here. This is a phenomenal image, and I expect the parents to go nuts over this one because this player doesn't get in as often as others, and it's lit well, and you can tell it's him. So I'm really happy with this image. I've been strobing for quite some time, um, and I know the ins and outs. I'm not by any means a expert at strobing, but I do know what I'm doing when it comes to setting up strobes in high school gyms, when it comes to setting up in collegiate arenas and professional arenas. I know the basics. I know I need a minimum 4 strobes for soccer, or for not for soccer, for basketball. 4 strobes will cover the court, but 6 are better. When you get into hockey, 8 or more are better. And it's a lot of trial and error. So you'll be learning as you do this. If you decide to try to attempt the strobe sports, I really hope you follow the directions I've given earlier in this video. Everything from the insurance side to the safety features to setting up the strobes and the types of strobes you can use. One thing I was going to say is I have a friend who has strobed in collegiate arenas with strobing women's basketball with quantum Q flashes. Now, what that tells me is with 2 or 4 of these streak lights I have from Autorama, I could go into the University of Colorado, Denver University, Air Force Academy, or just about any college across the nation. Find a place to mount those, not necessarily up in the catwalks, because they aren't really a powerful enough strobe to be up in the catwalks, but up high, maybe on the median level, press sections, stuff like that. Be able to set those strobes up and be able to light a gym. I know, or a stadium. I know I can do this stuff because I've got the background in it. Yeah, it would take some trial and error, some power settings, and different do's and do nots. But as you start strobing, you'll learn this stuff and you'll be able to do some of this stuff. So anyway, I hope this video has helped you. I was going to add some more stuff onto this video, but we're already at almost 49 minutes, and it's a lot longer than I expected, but there's a lot of information in this. So if you've sat through this whole time, please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Smash down on that like button. Click the little bell to let you know when a new video goes up. And in the next video, I promise it'll be a lot shorter, and we're going to talk about a contest that I'm going to start up in the next week or two. So until next time, keep shooting.